thoughts, perspectives, personality.
Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the Dynamics Store. My name's Eric Laguerre, your host, and also founder and principal of Laguerre Recruitment and Dynamics Door Recruitment, opening doors for Microsoft Dynamics professionals since 2019. Today's guest is Benjamin Breeden. He's the founder and CEO of Caf2Code, a trusted Microsoft partner for D365 finance and supply chain management, as well as the Power Platform. Caf2Code leverages the Power Platform to create efficiencies and offer business insights for its mid-market clients. Aside from that, Ben's also an entrepreneur, investor, technical architect, solutions architect, and executive. He leads with an inspirational and caring style, which I can also add, I definitely see and known by following him in the analog world and digitally for a couple of years now. But also aims to help his teams reach their full potential. Ben has designed, coded, published to Microsoft App Source, a successful ISV application in the role-based security horizontal. He considers himself a tech nerd who understands business, speaks finance, and is comfortable in the boardroom. Ben is also passionate about building a company that does things right, both for its employees and its clients. He helps Caf2Code clients align technology with business needs, maximize ROI from their tech investments, and strategize for the future. In his spare time, Ben enjoys time with his wife of 15 years and their dog, Batty. Ben, welcome to Dynamic Store. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Eric. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic too. Happy to have you on the show. So if you're familiar with prior episodes, we generally like to start things out here on Dynamic Store with an origin story, because everybody likes a good origin story, as Hollywood at least thinks. So Ben, when did the Dynamic Store open for you?
Well, it opened back in around 2010. I was working with a large telco at the time, and I had been out of college for a couple of years, and my boss at the time, one of my favorite bosses ever, he had a need for me to go in and work on the green screen AS400. So I was systems administrator for that for several years, starting in I think 2007, and I had enough at that time. I filled the need, and I wanted to move on to something else. And so when I found out they were upgrading JD Edwards to Microsoft Dynamics, I walked in his door and I said, boss, I'd like to have this project, the whole thing, give it to me. I want to run with it. And, the rest is history.
Wow. Okay. And then what year was that you moved to Microsoft Dynamics?
So I started in Dynamics at about 2010, and then I started Caf2Code in 2017. I was with a Gold ISV partner at the time, and I got a phone call from a former colleague of mine who was starting another implementation, and they wanted me to start the very next day, and basically said, name your price. And so that was a bit of a surprise to me, and I wasn't planning to create a legal entity right away. And the one I created, I certainly was never planning to take public or advertise or build a brand around. But I always liked the joke that programmers are machines that turn caffeine into code. And so Caf2Code was born the next day.
Yeah, I did not. I was always curious about the CAF part of to code, and now I know. So thank you. I was like, should I ask about it? Should I know? Now I know. It's funny. The creation of my own business was completely by accident as well, and it's funny how things work out that way. So that the first project kind of stumbled into it by accident. Called it Caf2Code. Did you know at what point during that project did you think, or maybe not even think at all, like, oh, I should keep this going. This is life now. Caf2Code.
That's a really good question. It became, apparent to me in around 2018, 2019 timeframe that I could expand. And I kind of drew up plans for it, but I set it aside. I kind of decided it wasn't for me. I thought I wouldn't get enough out of being an entrepreneur, running a business, hiring staff, doing sales. All those things sounded terrible to me. And so I said I'd never, ever do it. But something changed in 2020. I know you launched your business in 2019, so you're quite familiar with what followed the year after. And so we actually hired our first contractor in March of 2020 at the very peak of the panic around the pandemic. And that really came from a heart-centered place. I've been for a long time, since I was 17, saving up for an early retirement and investing. And I was actually at the point where I had a choice if I wanted to walk away in the middle of the pandemic and call it quits, or did I want to try for something bigger? And with the world kind of falling apart around me, it became apparent to me that I had more work than I could handle. And it just felt like a moral imperative for me to help the clients that I really enjoyed working with. They needed work done, and it was a challenge with everyone going remote. And then on the other hand, I had so many people in my network who were out of work, who needed a contract or needed a full-time employment gig. And so that really is what started it all in March 2020. And we've been hiring and expanding ever since.
Wow. Okay. So that just pinged my brain because now I'm almost even more curious about the origin to the origin. You mentioned that you had started saving up and investing at the age of 17 for retirement. That's rare, right?
It is. It's not the norm. The stats show that pretty clearly.
Yeah. And I'm label me a statistic because that was not on my mind at all in 17. As a matter of fact, my idea was like, well, I'll have the rest of my life to work, whatever. Shoot, I think I was still actually about at least more than half of me being 17. I was still working at McDonald's. But anyhow, do you think that obviously you learned a thing or two about finance if you're getting investing? Do you think that at that young age, investing in finance, that some of those concepts and ideas had already set a strong foundation for you to come in and understand concepts of accounting and finance that go into ERP implementations?
Oh, it's huge. I can't overstate how important that knowledge is, and that practice of studying companies and studying the economy. One of the things that I built around the core of my portfolio is around the consumer packaged goods space. So companies like Hershey, for example, and so that really influences who we are today, because that's our specialty with smaller organizations, in the 500 million to 2 billion range in revenue. Not like a Hershey, not giant, but still the same industry where typically food and beverage is a big component of that. And, so my investing experience and learning the language of business accounting, those things are really critical to be able to combine with the tech space and bring a complete offering.
Yeah. The consumer packaged goods vertical has been exploding as of late. I've never had that vertical knowledge asked for by so many clients, like here or there, but like virtually all of them. Oh yeah, any retail paired with consumer packaged goods / manufacturing, we need it, we want it. We have IP in that space now, and it's like, wow. And that's only been past like maybe 2-3 years or so. Is that sort of been your experience, or have you been working CPG all along?
CPT's been pretty busy over the past decade in the Dynamics world, but I do think that there's an uptick, and part of that's really social proof. If you're an executive, you don't want to be the lone wolf who's bringing in an ERP system that nobody's ever heard of. And so I experienced that in telco, where Dynamics was a very oddball choice for telecom. It just wasn't run in many spaces, and it didn't last. The company I first implemented at actually helped them migrate off of Dynamics several years later as Caf2Code. And so in the consumer packaged goods industry, I think part of what we're seeing with the current rise in interest in the market is based on the fact that there's a critical mass of Dynamics implementations in that market. And so if you're an executive for a CPG firm, you can point to a dozen of your peers and say they implemented it, it's working for them, there's vertical solutions that fit their needs, it should work for us too.
Yeah. So when you come into CPG firms, is that generally what's on executives' minds? Or how often or not, maybe even by percentage, how many boardrooms virtually or physically that you walk into where the executives know what they're getting into versus needing a little bit more client education, really need to be sold on the platform?
I think there's a good bit of selling that goes on in the selection process. Typically executives will have narrowed down. There's really 3 main choices, especially once you get above the 500 million in revenue mark. You're either going to be with SAP, you're going to be with NetSuite, or you're going to be with Dynamics, unless you've got some kind of homegrown operation going. And so I typically have walked in and seen where it's been narrowed down to 2. Usually somebody will have had a bad experience with SAP, or maybe they didn't like something about NetSuite. And so Dynamics comes in typically as a third option and then works its way into the top two. And then it's a matter of, getting down to price and implementation cost and features that it has and doesn't have, what ISV solutions are needed for the business processes and things like that.
Okay. So you're saying that it's mainly already selected and they already know what they're getting into, and there isn't as much of an uphill battle kind of selling them on the solution now that it's reached that critical mass.
That's been my experience, and I'm relatively new at sales. It's been something I've had to learn over the past 3 years, but I like to think of sales as you don't really convince buyers to buy. You guide them to buy something they already want to buy.
Yeah, and more of a steward of the process,
Exactly.
so to speak. Yeah. So the other thing that came to mind too, and to pedal backwards, your first implementation of Dynamics, what version, what modules were you working with, and what was your role on the implementation? Did you start from a technical background or purely functional? What was that all like?
Purely technical background. I was systems admin at the time. I had been a software developer as well. That's what my degree is in computer science, mostly software writing. And so it was an interesting and instructive project for me. About a decade ago, most ERP implementations for companies these size were run by the IT department. And there started to be a shift to where it's now, more often than not, I would say the vast majority of cases, it's the CFO. And so finance is running the show. When we started doing that implementation, it was the very beginning of that power shift. And I had an IT leader and a finance leader who did not get along. And so there was something of an open war, if you will, between the departments. And so when I naively walked into my boss's office and said, I want this project, I really didn't know what I was signing up for, that there would be this level of hostility. And so I found out pretty early into the project that I was going to be the only full-time IT resource on the project. I ended up hiring an intern to help me out. And together we did everything technical related. We built interfaces, we built customizations, we did the data migration, and I helped out with the project management as well. There was a director in finance. It was the first big project he'd ever run. And so I remember walking over to his office one day and sitting down with him after a long week of meetings and saying, look, we got to find a way to make this work. I know above my head, it's not a friendly picture, but I'm going to be friendly with you. Be friendly with me. Let's work together. Let's get this done. And at the end of the project, back when I was still drinking every now and then, he bought me a big old bottle of whiskey for coming through for him.
Yeah, maybe several would have been more aligned to the payment. But it's interesting, the scenario you just described, when specifically with end user clients that may or may not know they need a contractor. Maybe I sent them an email and they're thinking about it. I get on the phone with them and I qualify, okay, what are you doing? Who's there internally? And I run into very similar scenarios like that. And I'll set up, call a contractor, get them on the interview. They take it and the feedback is like, whoa. They're like, they would have met with you, the finance person, and be like, you have no idea what they're trying to do over there. Like, they're insane. They need help. This is going to be a great client.
There's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, looking back on it now, does it seem insane, like that setup? Like, you as a technical resource, not even a functional expert. Well, actually, I guess there's a better question. Did you have someone gathering requirements and putting together the functional design docs that wasn't you, or?
There were other people involved, business analysts and heads of departments, supervisors in accounting. Made great friends with the accounting department in that project. So it was for telecom, so there was no manufacturing, and it was heavy in the project modules on AX 2012 R2.
Okay, got it. So all right, that's good that you had business leaders kind of leading the charge on that, at least. So that's,
yeah.
Phew. Yeah, it still seems like a miracle that you pulled off. But so even after all that, you were like, okay, let's do it again.
Yeah, it's prior to that, I had worked with several reporting solutions and software development languages and built different tools. Being in telecom, the company I was with was acquiring a lot of companies and migrating them into a billing software. So there was a lot of data migration and interfaces going on. But up until that point, I hadn't really worked with the finances and the numbers. And it was, I remember some of my colleagues were, that was a red line for them. They never wanted to cross that and get involved with that complicated mess that's high risk. And so once I kind of went through a project and found that I could navigate that world pretty successfully, it kind of lit a spark for me, and I saw the future for Dynamics, and thankfully Microsoft did too, and continued to invest and build it into the cloud application it is today.
Yeah, it's there was a point in my career, even I started recruiting in this space in 2015, where I wasn't even believing in it that much, compared to other things. But I don't think anybody could have predicted the sort of meteoric rise in popularity. So I mean, with that said, what do you think in your mind? What are the biggest challenges to the overall growth, health, and of the Dynamics ecosystem?
I think it comes back to that social proof. I think the application itself is rock solid. The amount of updates and features that Microsoft is pushing to it are just incredible, and the robustness of the ISV space is really wonderful too. Microsoft also has built up a number of partners that both large and small, and in between, that are capable of delivering these projects. And so it's a really great ecosystem. But if you look at the target market, Dynamics only penetrates about 4%, and that's pretty small. And I think that as that grows, it'll have kind of a snowball effect where you get more and more social proof. The more reference calls that Microsoft or partners can coordinate for an executive in their same industry, the more that this application is going to be adopted. And so I think that's really the big thing is just continuing to put messaging out there to educate the market that this is a premier application, and continuing to roll it out. And I think at some point it's going to hit that critical mass to where I think breaking 10-20% of market shares is within reach.
Yeah, so that's an interesting statistic on 4%. It's been a while since I've looked at market share percentages of Dynamics, and I think the last time I did, I was just looking at CE and where it stands, which I think does a little bit better on the market share, competing with Salesforce. So I don't know if I can say that word on the show, but Salesforce and then SAP, I think. But so the 4% that you're discussing, is that both Business Central and Finance and Supply Chain Manager, or just Supply Chain Management in the enterprise ERP space? Or
just the enterprise, the market penetration for BC, I don't know the numbers, but I know it's a lot better. The uptake there, I think last I looked, they had over 135,000 implementations, whereas with finance and supply chain, it's in the 20 to 25,000 range right now.
Okay, is that per year or
total number of live customers?
Wow, okay. Because I feel like in 2017 or something, the total customers for AX, or maybe even 2016, was like 13,000. So that's impressive growth for sure.
Yeah, not bad at all. Not bad at all.
Yeah. So if we have, here's a question for you. If we have that many new end users, that's that many more users at these places, why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to find Dynamics talent right now? What's going on in the market as an employer? How's it been for you?
It's been an interesting few years. We had the whole Great Resignation happen just in the past year and a half or so, and that was, I think, the first time in my life, in my professional life, where labor really had the upper hand in terms of demanding salaries and getting paid what they're due. And so I think in the Dynamics market that has leveled off, but it hasn't sunk. So we're at a new level of expectation for compensation and benefits and flexibility and things like that. And I think that's good. I mean, I think that the workers in this field, they work extremely hard. And when it comes to how we address, what's been a years long labor shortage, I think the messaging, the training, we talked recently about TechFluent. There's organizations out there that are helping to bring new talent into this space. One thing I find is that the general public has no idea what an ERP is, let alone Dynamics. And there are plenty of people who are professionals in finance and accounting, in tech, even in things like math, and just more general subjects. There are a ton of translatable skills that can come into this market. So I think it's really a messaging thing. The labor market as a whole has really, unemployment is still low, but there's enough skilled professionals to where I think we can draw from other buckets and bring people into this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And from what I've seen from following you on LinkedIn, is that you take risk with bringing people onto Caf2Code that come from diverse working backgrounds beforehand, and train them into viable consultants. I've seen working there for years, getting promoted, building careers. What's that journey been like for you? Well, let's start at the beginning of it. What were your thoughts when you're like, you know what, I'm more or less, I kind of hate this terminology, but more or less going to take people off the street and teach them ERP. Did you think, nah, this is so crazy, let's give it a try, or were you sure it was going to work? I mean, how was that all in the beginning of the journey and making that decision?
It was kind of touch and go, but I mean, at the very beginning, we had, that was at the point where there were a lot of skilled professionals who were out of work and people I had worked with previously. So I was able to build the very first small team out of people I had worked with and knew. And one of my first hires after that, the first unknown hire that I made, to where I had no prior knowledge of this person or how they worked or how they might fit, was a person who had been out of work for 9 months at that point, was on food stamps, had a kid, had a leaky roof, and had almost given up on the market, and gone and become a school teacher, a Sunday school teacher. And the opportunity that we had posted was kind of one of her last ditch efforts. And she's still with the company, has been promoted, I think, more than anybody, now a solutions architect, and just a tremendous talent, a leader in the company. And seeing her grow like that and build her confidence and her competence at the same time, it's just been tremendous. She's now going around and giving speeches at conferences and things like that. And, to be a part of that and to help make that happen is, it's probably what gives me the most amount of fulfillment about running business.
Yeah, that's a hell of a come up story. And it all starts with somebody taking a risk. And I would like to see more stories like that repeated and happening more often. And you touched on, talk about TechFluent and what they're doing with the focus on BIPOC individuals and training them up. I think they doubled the size of the cohort class for this year too. So I think they're in the 70s. I just got an email actually from Liz about industry coach training that's happening in June. So pretty excited about this big new class. And but when Liz and I were talking, we sort of like discussed this scenario of like, someone's got to take the risk, and as much as we can, do it one part or the other, one small partner or another to do it, can it be enough, like one at a time? Where do we go from here? How do you keep that up and taking the risk and finding the right people? Like, what helps you identify the criteria of like, okay, this person has no idea maybe even what ERP is, but what qualities do you think stand out the most for someone that's even thinking about a career in delivering ERP solutions, even if it's not Dynamics?
We put it into our company values. We have only two. There's drive and integrity. And our view is that if you have those two things, we can build you into a Dynamics consultant or an ERP consultant. And so, integrity is kind of difficult to test for, in a job interview. And so it's something that we kind of are learning along the way. How do we suss that out? And then drive, I've heard it referred to as motor in the sports world. You know, if you're in basketball, you have somebody who's a rebounder or setting picks or doing all the little things that need to be done for a team to win the game. And they're out there, you know, they come up early to practice, maybe they stay after to shoot free throws or whatever they need to do to get things done and rise to the next level. And so that's what we're looking for, is somebody who has demonstrated a pattern of, you know, going above and beyond to, you know, really advance their skill sets and the people that they're working with. One example comes to mind, a developer that we brought in out of college who had built a very interesting application in the railroad industry in college. And so there's a common theme here at Caf2Code where a lot of our employees worked their way through college. And that's a good indicator for us of drive. It's not an exclusionary thing, but when we see it, it kind of sets a light bulb off and says, well, there's an indicator that this person might have some drive behind them.
Awesome. Cool. And with Caf2Code, you know, I'm familiar. We spoke about this recently for the viewers who aren't in the know. You know, what are your specialties? What are you best at? Where are you heading? Where are you going?
Great question. Well, we specialize early on in project rescues, turnarounds, where either the project is approaching go live and the go live date's been set back a couple times, or maybe there's a work stream that's not complete. We are nimble and fast, and so we're able to jump in and get things done and make things right. We've also had multiple occasions where we've come in after go live and it's just a complete mess and everything's chaotic. The end users upset with their partner. They're getting ready to abandon the system in some cases. And we've been able to come in and make some pretty structural changes, specifically around inventory costing. Has been one of the areas that's important in consumer packaged goods. And we've developed a lot of expertise in that. It's an intricate process getting inventory correctly costed and allowing the business processes to run that the way they need to. One example is if you need to backdate transactions, certain inventory costing methods aren't applicable. And so we've developed some good specialties around that. And, you know, we're doing bidding on implementations currently. We have a couple interesting projects that are in the pipeline. And so, you know, the main thing is, you know, no matter what the context, it's our ability to come in and hit the ground running that I think delivers the most value.
Right. So having had come in and cleaned up so many messes, in your mind, where is it? You've seen a lot of ERP projects that have gone wrong. In your mind, is there a reoccurring theme or something that happens along the line that makes ERP projects fail? Is there a common denominator in that, or are there many different factors? Which ones do you run into the most often?
The one that I run into that I really don't enjoy is when you have a steering committee that throws a dartboard at the calendar and says, this is the date we are going live. That really should be something that's backed into looking at the requirements, looking at the work that needs to be done, resource constraints, and building that out into a timeline, and then saying, here's a range that's doable, instead of just grabbing a date and saying, let's go. And a lot of times that's coming from, you know, from the executives, from the boardroom, from the steering committee, and it's driven by a desire to keep costs lower. And so I think that, you know, having open and honest communication with clients, you know, is something that's, you know, the onus is on the partner to do and do right. The other element that I've seen that maybe it's not so much what causes projects to fail, but when I've seen projects succeed is when you have business process owners who truly take ownership of a certain area of the system and understand, this is mine. I'm controlling how this works. When it messes up, I'm responsible for fixing the errors or delegating those tasks. So identifying early on those leaders and empowering them is a really important part to make projects successful.
Right. You mentioned something too that I forgot to question around, and it was IT leading the project versus operations. And I have a PM interviewing right now for a role, and she asked me very early on, because she's been doing this for a while. She's like, all right, is this project being is steering committee IT or is it operations? I told her it's IT and it's global. There's some folks in Switzerland, there's some folks in the Bay Area, Atlanta, whatever. And she's like, oh, she's like, oh. So I'm not going to say what she said after that, but you know, your thoughts and feelings on that. What are the pros and cons? How does that affect the consulting firm that's, you know, vending on the project and their approach? You know, what key differences does it make, you know, when working on an ERP implementation?
It's interesting. I think it's very much possible for both scenarios to be successful. So IT leadership in a project and finance leadership in a project, either one is possible to do well. When you're working with an IT leader who's the sponsor or in charge, you're going to have a higher adherence to things like security role segregation of duties. You're going to have best practices around automated testing, a cadence for deploying code. If you flip it over and you're on the finance side, some of those things aren't done at all. Some of them are pushed to the back burner. And you know, there's a mindset of, you know, we need it now. So, you know, even if you're deploying code once a week, too bad, we need this tomorrow, get it done. And so the good thing about working with finance is that the whole business funnels into the finance and accounting department. At the end, they have to deal with whatever was entered into the system. And so that gives you a really clear picture of how things are going. If the transactions aren't hitting the right GL accounts, then there's something messed up. And so whether it's business process or user error, there's something to work through. IT doesn't see as much of that. They see, you know, is the code deployed? Are there errors? Did the test succeed? Then we're good. But that's not enough. There's the whole business process component that needs to be, you know, worked on. And I find working with finance leaders, they understand that a bit more than IT does.
Yeah. Do you find that there are some end users that are better structured than others, where the steering committee is kind of diversified with key stakeholders from everywhere, be it accounting, supply chain, and also IT, kind of working in tandem?
I've seen both situations where the steering committee has a good balance and a level of authority. But I've also seen steering committees that are more or less a rubber stamp, and that's not good at all. You know, the ones that are properly balanced, you know, the ones that I like to work with, and the ones that are empowered that make decisions. You know, but I've also, you know, I've seen a mix, and so, you know, steering committees in one project may be the be all end all. In another project, it's an afterthought. So I think it's really about getting a sense and identifying early on the key relationships that you need to build with a client and working those relationships.
Yeah. Would you say that because Caf2Code, where you folks sit in the market as a smaller consulting firm that has rescue projects, you kind of never know what you're going to be walking into, right? Big, small, whatever the steering committee is, maybe some larger partners. They're used to, you know, executive steering committees that are very similar, right? Similar size clients, similar verticals. Do you think that because you can take on clients sort of like any size to save that the flexibility of being a smaller firm and working with any size steering committee and different combinations of executives in there, do you think it helps to be a smaller firm in those scenarios?
I think it can, especially when you look at the segment, say the bottom 20% in terms of size, that's eligible for finance and operations. I'd put that around, you know, maybe 250 million plus, but preferably more around 400 to 500 million plus in annual revenue, and going all the way up to about 1.5 billion in revenue. That segment is best for smaller partners. I think with larger partners, they get assigned the C team or the D team at best. They don't get the best consultants from the larger partners, and they don't get as much attention. And they also, you know, because they run with more flexibility, as you were alluding to, you know, it's better to have a partner that's flexible instead of one that's, you know, rigid expectations around this is how we do things. So I think our adaptability is a strength, especially for those smaller clients. You know, we do work with some larger clients, but as we've kind of honed in on our specialty, that market is really what we're going for.
Okay. Now, as you mentioned, do a lot of rescue projects, but are there also greenfield implementation projects that Caf2Code picks up as well?
There are, and we've got some very interesting ones right now in the pipeline that I think are going to be, you know, great opportunity for our team to kind of put it all together and you know, bring it to the table. So Greenfield, I find, has many different definitions. To me, a Greenfield project means there's no ERP at all, maybe QuickBooks. But I've also seen people call Greenfield where somebody's migrating off of SAP or NetSuite. And so, to me, Greenfield projects are really interesting for my team right now because it's an ability to go in with a blank slate and, not a lot of business processes. Whereas if you go in and everything's already kind of dialed in and there's this mindset that we have to adapt the system to our processes instead of the other way around, that kind of sets off a red flag for me. So we like to work with leaders that are adaptable too and are willing to mold the processes around the system.
Yeah. And we discussed this before too about how tricky it is to sort of nurture the leads for the larger implementation projects. You end up, you said you specialize in the rescue projects. Why is it they end up specializing in the rescue projects? For you and I in the know, that's one thing, but for other people to kind of understand how everything works, and it'd be good for the folks viewing at home to know, why is it that it's mostly the cleanups that you're doing instead of the implementations.
Yeah, I think that the existence of the cleanup market is really evidence of the fact that some of the larger partners, the vast majority of new implementations go through only about a dozen firms. And so, if there's rescue projects enough for not just Caf2Code, but many of the smaller partners out there are picking these projects up time after time, it kind of goes to show that the larger partners are failing on occasion. And you expect that. There's going to be some failure rate. But what's driving that, I think, are, oversold expectations to where most projects, I wish I had statistics on this, but so many projects I've seen have been delayed and delayed and delayed. And when they finally go live, there's a level of frustration and the partnership has fallen apart. And then something worse happens. Once they go live, the implementation team leaves. Maybe they stick around a week or two, but then they're gone, along with all that process knowledge, all that business knowledge, the familiarity. And then as a larger partners, you're shunted off to this managed services team who has no idea who you are. You have no idea who they are. When you open a new ticket, you have to explain the customizations and the processes all over again. And then same thing when you open the next ticket. And so that drives a level of frustration through the roof. And suddenly we get a prospect for Caf2Code who's willing to switch partners. It's not a painless thing, but it's not super. I mean, it's relatively, I call it a moderate level of effort to switch partners. So it's not something that someone's going to do lightly. But if they have enough pain from those delayed go lives and from the switch to support, then they're going to be open to it.
Yeah. Now, do you think there's a more sort of equitable way for Microsoft themselves to maybe like distribute leads and identify bringing in more partners into the fold to avoid some of the issues with maybe failed implementations that might not even really be from a lack of skills and knowledge, but just resource allocation, things like that? How can we sort of ameliorate that and make sure that we can see more successful implementations the first time around?
I'd actually like to give Microsoft a little credit for this. They've been investing a lot in things like fast track and methodologies for implementations. They actually just launched an implementation guide that's very thorough. It goes as detailed as you want it to go. They do have business process libraries in lifecycle services so that you're not repeating the same discovery about what basic process for procure to pay is. So I think that Microsoft is putting a lot of tools out there to help implementations succeed more. And moreover, the sales team recently launched an emerging partner cohort. And so Caf2Code and 11 other firms are part of this cohort to help build us up and give us the connections that we need at Microsoft, the resources that we need, so that we can become really the next wave of major Dynamics partners. So I really do see Microsoft seeing this as something that's important for the ecosystem and taking actions to help uplift the partners that are investing their own money and resources into being Dynamics firms.
Yeah, and it's nice to see that happening, acknowledging and then categorizing that as emerging partners, and putting them on a track to success. Because right now, you and I both know there's more than enough work to go around and not enough people to do it. and having more entrance into the market with different points of views and even personalities to mesh with different types of clients, so is always a good thing. Now, in your spare time outside of being executive and of a Dynamics partner, what can we find you doing?
What's spare time? I have no idea what that concept means over the past 3 years. Before that, maybe find me out fishing or going and doing some traveling or something. But I'm actually taking for the first time in 15 years a 2-week vacation this summer to celebrate my 15-year anniversary. So that'll be a good time to step away, and I got to kind of rediscover who I am outside of work. When you launch a business like this, it takes everything you've got.
Yeah, it does. I almost had to. It's kind of funny. I realized since starting my business, I don't really have new friends that are not. And I almost made it a policy. I'm like, all right, no new friends policy. It's not worth it. But then you end up making some friends along the way in the same line of business, and that spare times. Sometimes I have clients that are coming to town or in town, by de facto are the people that I end up spending my time with anyway, are people I've met in my recruitment journeys. It's funny how that works out.
The good thing is there's a lot of great personalities in this space. So, there's plenty of people to find, even if, spare time's hard to find, we're able to network at work and, enjoy the company of some of our colleagues.
Yeah, and it's really probably there are several factors of why I started this Dynamic Store TV show, but the biggest part is the 3 Ps are the pillars: platforms, perspectives, personalities. And it was to highlight the personalities of people in this space, because at this point, I'm probably over 1,000. It's hard to say. Not everybody's a hardcore Dynamics professional that I've talked to in that number that's probably in the thousands, but if they've worked with it in some capacity, the vast majority are professionals, but thousands of people I've spoken to, so many really strong personalities and fascinating people. And it's what makes things fun for me. It can get pretty bland and just recruiting for the same type of roles over and over if it wasn't for the people that make it fun. So I agree with you on that one. You never know who you're going to get. And I guess, for the lack of new friends, there's always new candidates and clients to meet with, right?
That's true. But, hopefully things are starting to settle in for Caf2Code. We're getting into a nice groove. And so I think here in the next year or two, I'll be able to actually find that elusive spare time once again.
Oh, man, I hope you do. So again, folks, hey, thanks for tuning in with us here on the Dynamics Store for our guest appearing here, Benjamin Breeden, CEO and founder of Caf2Code. Ben, thanks for being with us today. It was an absolute pleasure meeting with you.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation, Eric. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Dynamics.